This is First Encounter, a podcast exploring both the foundations and the future of historical romance. Hello and welcome to First Encounter. I am Andy James, a historical romance enthusiast and author, and I am very excited for today's episode because my guest is one of my dear friends, Sri Savita. She's also a historical romance author. You may or may not know her book. I hope you do. She has one novella out. It's called The Deed with the Duke. It's fantastic because she writes Regency set books centering on Indian characters, which I love because we just need more representation and they're fantastic. So I'm so excited to be joined by Sri today. We are discussing Devilish by Jo Beverley because Sri talks this book up all the time. And I was like, well, if you love it this much, we got to talk about it on the podcast because I've never read Jo Beverley. So this will be totally new to me. And I want to know why you enjoy this book so much because I trust Sri's taste and, you know, she's just great. So welcome, Sri. I just rambled on and on.
Thank you for having me here. I'm so excited.
Welcome.
I love chatting with you and I'm really excited about this book.
And another point that I'm going to mention, because I think it is going to be relevant to our discussion of Devilish, is Sri is a psychology professor. That is her day job outside of writing romance. And so she's really good at getting to the depths of her characters and the thought process and what's behind the emotions and the feelings and all of that. And I think that's part of the reason she really enjoyed this book. And I know we're going to get into some of the underlying stuff when we discuss it. So just pointing that out to say that she knows of what she talks about when we're going to get into gender dynamics, power dynamics, all those great things.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again so much for joining me. I'm very excited to chat with you. Before we dive into discussing the book, which I hope some of you have had a chance to read, and if not, hopefully this conversation will make you want to read it. But spoilers ahead, you always know that. We're going to discuss this book. So if you don't want to be spoiled, go read it and then come listen. But anyways, I digress. Before we get into the book, I want to talk a little bit more about Sri because like I said, I think she's a fantastic writer. I do, again, I'll just hold this up again because yay. So The Deed with the Duke is her book that is out. It's fantastic. It's a novella, but it's a hefty novella. And it's just, again, the characters, the emotion. She's so good at this. But you have an upcoming project releasing October 9th. This was just recently announced, but our other friend, author Catherine Grant, who hosts the Historical Romance Sampler podcast, she's been on here before. Hopefully you guys are familiar with Catherine. But Catherine has created this wonderful world in her own novels called Northfield Hall. She has lots of books associated with it. So she's created this wonderful setting that I won't go into much. My episode with Catherine, we discussed it all, follows the Preston family, which runs this estate, Northfield Hall, that's very open and progressive and has people working there from all backgrounds, all classes as part of the estate. And so she, from what I understand, I'll let Sri take this over in a minute, but Catherine organized this project. It's an anthology coming out that looks at holidays at Northfield Hall. And Sri has written one of the contributions to this anthology, Diwali with Her Duke. And I was lucky enough to get to read this early. And you guys, that is so fantastic. So Sri, why don't you tell us a little bit more about this anthology project and your contribution to it?
Yeah. So I was kind of casually talking with Catherine, I think, prior to the release of The Deed with the Duke, because I'm writing a family series. And so that book came out first. It would actually be book 2 in the series because this Diwali book is going to be the parents' story. So that's book 1. And at the time, I wasn't sure if I was going to expand, from Roz's character or Camelia's character and what I was going to do with that story because that book came out in another multi-author collab, but we were writing across different genres. So I was just kind of chatting with Catherine about, just the nerves of being someone that had a debut, being someone that, you look around and I don't see a lot of books or characters like mine. And so I sort of take that to mean there's not a want or a need for these stories. And so I was kind of, just spiraling. No, of course not. So Catherine was, just really great about reassuring me that there was a place for these stories and that, I'm doing something that is interesting. I'm doing it well. And, I have mentioned that it's hard to kind of get into some like holiday collaboration because a lot of them center on Christmas.
Yeah.
And, my characters are sort of an interesting place because a lot of them are born and raised in England. And that I think is interesting to me because it's true for my own story, right? Like I was born in the United States. And I think that that's, presents a different complexity to think about your identity as an Indian person. What are your connections to India? What are your connections to, maybe your parents if they've immigrated here, the languages, and then also being, rooted to England in a way where you didn't have to assimilate as much because you were born there.
Right.
And there's more to then talk about with the characters who had to do. So Camille is working class and she did come from India. And so I had mentioned that, if I were going to do a holiday story, I might do one about Diwali because I haven't seen one in historical romance. It was a little daunting to think about how I would fit those traditions and cultural elements into Regency England. I think for a lot of my stories, they do tend to be very deeply character driven because the thing that I'm trying to focus on is bringing forward those elements that are there in the society. And, Courtney Milan has talked about how there's all these textiles, there's tea, there's all these imports that are from India, but the people themselves are not centered and in the focus. And so what I do is say that these things are already here. It's possible for them to be spraying Diwali. They have the elements are needed to do some of these traditions. So that's something that, I had just sort of said as a passing comment. And then Catherine came back to me a little later saying that she was thinking about doing this holiday at Northfield Hall idea. And she wanted to incorporate multiple authors to talk about different holidays. So not just, one story, not just about one holiday. And to bring in some of that diversity because it really suits like the world that she's already created and the values of her characters.
Right.
So that was so meaningful to say, because Catherine's kind of the first person that I knew in historical romance. And for her to not only, validate what I'm doing and the kinds of things that I care about in my writing and in my stories, but to also create a space for me to be able to write this story that was something that, was daunting because I haven't seen something like this before. Would it fit? Would it be something that people want? And for her to say that, like, yeah, there's a space for this to shine. And I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that you had mentioned that you might want to write a Diwali story. So that's kind of what, the conversation started as. And then she said that she was going to bring some other authors on board. Our friend Isabella Kamal is also writing.
Yes.
She's actually writing a couple stories in the anthology. So one is on Valentine's Day and then one is about Eid. So that is just super special and to be part of an idea like this that, just gives you that space to say, yes, it's fiction, but sometimes it feels so dire. It feels like, this is a degree of believability that readers can't extend, right? And that's not true. And I think that's why, like I said, with a lot of my books, I focus a lot on the characters because the main thrust of what I'm trying to do is show that there is a way for their cultural practices, their day-to-day lives that fit into this world. I need to spend time showing that, right? So that's what I'm going to center. I'm not necessarily focusing on huge external plots, which is kind of different than why I enjoy Devilish. There's a lot of like espionage and, things like that happening there in court politics. So, that's not necessarily the kind of thing that I'm doing, and especially with this family series. A lot of it is really just coming to terms with they're who they are in the world that they move in. And, to sort of like plug why Devilish speaks to me so much is because I think I've just sort of, branding is like an evolving thing for a lot of authors. And I think for me, my characters do really try to figure out what their sense of power and control means because I this seems fascinating to me because as a person of color is something that is represented in a lot of cases in historical romance, my characters too. I think it's something that is at the forefront of your mind in some way, maybe not in an explicit, obvious way, but you do move through the world in a way where you're told very early on, you'll have to work twice as hard to go half as far or whatever it is. So I think that those themes about power and control are really about just taking up space in the world. And like in the author's note of The Deed with the Duke, I say that it shouldn't be a hard stretch for people to see characters like mine in this world. But sometimes I'm walking alongside the path that history took because they have to carve out their own space. And that is a lot of work. It's a lot of work to research the jewelry, the clothing, the foods, and try to fit those things in. I was just reading about, actually we were talking about your novella, and you mentioned, like, in the section that we were reading, the character was menu planning and talking about potatoes and peas. And I was like, you know what? Aloo Mutter has potatoes and peas. Like, I could work this in a way where, like, the ingredients literally are already there. It's just a matter of, emphasizing that in a way where I'm saying, hey, look, this is Indian, but it fits with the world. So that's what I did. I have a character thinking about, like, how great would it be if I updated the French fare to include some Indian things? And that's in the next siblings book within this series. So, there's things like that where it's a little difficult because, and I'm from a degree of, like, I am not someone that's, living in England, and obviously not during the Regency era, but I think some of those, like, challenges of, like, bringing some of this forward in a way where, and I think also with holiday stories, some of those feel good moments and things like that, we've talked about this. I think sometimes, like, you really do just have to tell yourself, like, readers love the cheese, cringe doesn't exist. Because I tend to hold myself back a lot, because one of the hardest things, as much as I enjoy drafting, is that there's so much of me wrapped up in what I'm doing. It really does feel like I'm on trial in some sort of way. And especially with the way that people care so much, about historical accuracy, that's another level of worry or fear that comes into the writing process. So that's why I like internal turmoil. I have a lot of it. My characters have a lot of it.
Yeah.
And I think that, the angst is warranted. I love manufactured melodrama. So, like, I don't want, I do have themes of grief because of my own personal experience as a writer. And I think, that's sort of woven into, especially the Diwali story, and for the next book as well. Roz's father has passed at that point. My father passed recently.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's there, but that's not necessarily that kind of heavy angst where, it's like literally life or death is not the angst that I enjoy so much of. Like, it's this idea of shedding control. I do think in romantic relationships, there is going to be an exchange of power, like whether you want to talk about it as power dynamics or not, because I think power dynamics gets kind of an ugly rap. It's not always about coercion. It's not always about manipulation. My characters do some of that, and I think that's human. I think people are going to do things that are not nice to people they care about too.
Yes.
Or, they're going to lash out because they're trying to protect themselves. And so that's the thing that's interesting to me, is really this, like, this anguish about what are you willing to give up or let go of, because you have to recognize that in order to have the kind of emotional connection that you want, the mutually satisfying physical intimacy that you want, there's a degree of having to let go of something. Like, you have to set aside your ego. You have to make yourself vulnerable and share something honest and real. Admit when you've done something wrong. And those are things that are hard to do for anyone. And so that's why I think that power is kind of inherent to romance, to human behavior. I think my characters are searching for what degree of control they can have in their lives. And of course, romance is going to kind of threaten that for them. So they really have to figure out, like, how do I establish my sense of power whilst getting the connection that I want? In that way of graph, can you have all of those things, but you have to give up, and feels like a sacrifice, but feels like, a change, right? Because that's the struggle. Is like, some costs for change are going to be too high. And when do you feel like, okay, that's the line for me, or I'm willing to make that sacrifice?
What are your, like, kind of set boundaries, and what can you adapt and what can you not?
Yeah. And again, I think it's so wonderful to see that. I think historical romance does it really well. And also Devilish, because, there's a lot of discussion about, especially women, like, what the power is that you can have, especially when you have a society that has so many boundaries and limitations. Like, that's what I think is so interesting about writing historical romance, Regency, societies where there is a lot of rules and structure, but I don't want my characters to be limited by that. I want them to overcome it in some way. And that's the story. Exactly. And that's the story. Yeah.
For sure. Well, again, I mean, if that wasn't enough to convince you that Sri really thinks deeply about her characters and what she's writing, you really should check out her projects. So The Deed with the Duke is out now. You can find this in Kindle Unlimited and other places. And the upcoming anthology, The Holidays at Northfield Hall, that is releasing October 9th. I am going to put links and show notes on like where you can access that. And it's 5 total novella-length stories in 1 volume written by Sri, our friend Isabella Kamal, Catherine Grant, and Charlie Lane. So it's going to be fantastic. I'm very excited for it. Like I said, I have read Diwali with Her Duke, and it is so good, you guys. It's so good.
It was such a great, and we can definitely talk about the characters and things like that too. It was such an interesting and fun experience to be able to write within Catherine's world and to sort of see how we were going to map out these holidays. I think it's going to be a really unique, fun offering as far as holiday stories and
I love it.
I hope people like it.
And I love that it encompasses multiple holidays. It's not just the standard ones. Like I honestly, I was trying to organize something like this myself, where we could talk about like someone's going to write a winter solstice story, someone's going to write like, but then it kind of fell apart, and that's fine.
Yeah.
These things happen.
Things happen.
But I love that idea of focusing on more. And Catherine's, the world she set up at Northfield Hall is such a perfect setting for it. So I'll link to the conversation I had with Catherine so you can learn more about that series and the Prestons and kind of, because it's really fantastic and more people should see the episode I did with Catherine. So Sri, before we dive into Devilish, you've already hit at some great themes and things that we want to talk about, but I want to know a little bit more broadly about how you got into reading romance and liking romance, and then how you decided you wanted to write it.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of journey when I look back on it too. It wasn't, that long ago this started. It was 2020. My from cancer in February, and grief is a very hard time. It's not a linear journey, and I found a lot of comfort in books. And prior to that, that was probably like my second year as a faculty member. There was grad school while you're dissertating and doing the master's and PhD. I wasn't reading a lot for fun.
No.
I definitely wasn't writing a lot for fun. I wanted to stay connected to some of my roots, and I actually came to writing fiction through writing poetry. And so I got involved with my grad school's lit journal and as poetry editor and then editor-in-chief. But it sort of connected to that world. And my sister was the one who was always kind of encouraging me to get back into reading. She's like, you should try audiobooks, which I now love, because she's like, that's a way that you can fit it into, your chores or whatever it might be. And so I had sort of returned to reading because it was something that was a comfort. We had more time to be able to get back into things during the pandemic. I was thinking of my sister and how she was kind of encouraging me to get back into reading. And like, I had sort of gotten into some things in December of 2020. So like right before she had passed, but I was rediscovering what I still liked. I'm like, what do I still like reading? And so I was going back to things that I had read when I was younger that I liked, but things weren't necessarily hitting the same way. And I felt like, am I just not going to find a book that I loved? And then then I got to, I think I was reading romance before I started reading it. So I got into romance and I was like, oh, here we go. Like, this is the high octane, feeling that I want.
Yeah.
And I think I always describe it as like, this is kind of weird, but I think about it as like, you're seeing the world through like a fly's eyes. Like everything is so heightened. Like I love the tension of like those little things, those little gestures, those things that people aren't saying, like all that stuff is psychologically interesting and just like,
it's the
exactly
metaphor for all of it, or not metaphor, but it encapsulates. I mean, it's a visual rather than what we love in a book, but it's everything about what we love.
Yeah, it's everything. And I think that the things I was really craving, like I just love sort of those like small gestures that are big things, those things that are like so heightened, like again, that internal angst around, it's just very human behavior. And I think romance really does that better than other genres. Like you get so up close and personal with each character, especially if you've got dual POV. I don't feel like you really attach to the characters in the same way. Well, certainly I don't necessarily feel like that with like literary fiction. I think with other like genre fiction, you can definitely find that, because I also started reading fantasy and romantasy at the time. And I think that's how I kind of found my way to historical, because, I do love contemporary romance. I think I actually started in that space thinking about what I wanted to write, because I think I would become historicals. That was a big thing too, because I was reading a lot of historical, and as I said, my background is in poetry. The kind of prose that I like to write, the kind of melodrama, the kind of angst, the kind of turmoil, historical is just such a beautiful playground for that.
It's so great.
And I don't get the same sense of being able to run free with all of that in other genres. And so I was like, working on my contemporary stories, which, I may go back to at some point, who knows? But I was longing to write historical. And so I think that, I started a book, which I have finished. This is the one that I talked to you about. It's a pirate heroine, smuggler hero, and I will return to that at some point.
I mean, it's hot pirate summer, so I mean,
yeah, exactly. It was a great training ground to kind of do the kinds of things I wanted, to have a little bit more of like a secondary, mystery sort of plot and practice those kinds of things. And I just really loved it. And again, I was having those conversations with Catherine about like, should I take this leap? Like, should I do this? Because it's, I don't know how. I mean, I get that people understand that releasing a book is scary, but like the amount of fear that I felt, like the amount of spiraling, like before The Deed with the Duke came out, is so different, because I really felt like this is a larger issue. And I've talked about this with that book, that it's taken a lot of time, I think, for me, for media representation. We're still not quite there to accept that you can have romantic leads that are people of color. And especially, we don't see that a lot with Asian or Indian people. We don't see that a lot with Asian men. And for me to be able to write about characters who share some elements of my identity, who, find the things that make them Indian attractive about each other, that's something that's super meaningful. Like Catherine, I stay out of being my reviews. There was a reader who had said, like, this was so meaningful to me to see that characters like me were talking about these features and appreciating that in each other. And this is something I talked to you about because, if we get a chance to get into that, in Devilish, there's a character who I think it's worth talking about, the fact that, I think we're in a time now where people can be and should be more careful in how they're talking about representation, especially if they're not writing about their own identity.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
But, one of the things that I make a point to do, of course, I love, these romantic descriptions of like, brown eyes, like drinking chocolate. I use it myself too. But when I'm talking about skin, there will be times where I'll say, because I don't commoditize brown skin. And I also want to say that that's enough. Like, that's enough of a modifier. Like, that my characters are brown. There's a lot of this, like, joke about like, whenever I'm reading romance, I just sub in like insert whatever actor they really like or whatever it is. And I'm like, you better not be doing that with my books. Like, my characters are brown. They are Indian. That's going to be like super emphasized in what I'm doing, which is why I focus so much on the characters. Like, and anyway, that's just a lot of stuff to say that I think that, that was part of my hesitation for as long as it did before I got into writing romance, and specifically writing historical romance.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, this collab opportunity for The Deed with the Duke came up, and that was through an editor I was working with for other work, because I also have a background in writing erotica. And so, we were talking about this collaboration that she wanted to do. And I decided, okay, I'm going to take the chance to do this for this one book. Who knows? Like, we'll see how that lands. I didn't have a plan for a series at all at that point. And then I started thinking about like, well, maybe I should think about this just in case. And then that's, where things really took off. I thought about, okay, well, what's the story? Roz's father, at the beginning, he's sort of dealing with his own grief. And then, thinking about his siblings for the rest of the series. And then thinking about his parents, when we had this discussion. Actually, at that point, I was talking to my editor for The Deed with the Duke. And I had mentioned Catherine had already talked to me about this idea. And she was the one who said, well, what if you wrote it about Roz's father? And that was really what opened up that idea for me. So all this to say, I kind of came to romance because I came to fiction first because I was trying to reconnect with something me and my sister shared, like seeing the way that authors depict grief is comforting, because you kind of can work through some of your things on the page, especially in romance. I think I can put up with more of that emotional torture because you're going to be okay in the end, right? You're going to be taken care of.
Right. You can put them through it because they'll be a happy ending.
Exactly. And that's what I like doing too. I'm like, yes, I will give you the angst because I know I'm going to take care of you at the end. So, and that's also something with my journey where I think because I love to sort of like really turn the keys on that angst, you know, it can be daunting to figure out how am I going to give them an ending that like really sails them over the top here and stuff. So that's like an interesting challenge too. But I think in romance, I was seeing that, you know, at first I think was more on the fantasy side, like reading like Death Dragon was easier than reading about Death by Cancer. But historical, it's a genre where, you know, there's no shortage of dead fathers or dead siblings, but it has also been cathartic and healing to, and that's what I kept saying, you know, because I came to Bookstagram thinking like, I'm just going to read and I'm reading to heal. And then I was writing to heal. And so like, I think seeing this mirror for things that I was feeling in the characters, I mean, we know that that's why we love to read, right? That human connection. So I just really fell back in love with it. And I'm so thankful that like that spark of reading and that spark of writing, like waited until I was ready to return to it. And I feel so grateful for that. That's like one of my whys that I come back to when I'm like, God, why do I have to keep editing right now or something? You know, like, So that's a very like windy journey, but sometimes I'm like, I can't believe I waited so long to put out my first historical, but I'm so glad I did because now, you know, I see myself writing it for a long time and hopefully people want to keep reading it for a long time.
I hope you are because I love your writing and I think we do need your characters and we need more representation. But well, let's talk about the actual book that we're here to discuss. I mean, not that I don't want to talk about you, but so I had heard you mention, so Sri and I don't even know honestly how we became friends. It was just, you know, authors chatting in the historical.
Those are like the best
space.
Friendships where like, I'm like, I actually can't remember when like you were in my life when we were friends.
I don't know. I just, you know, in the last 3 years, as I've entered kind of this world of historical romance and connected with other authors, you meet people in different ways. And it's so funny because I feel like a lot of my closest friends now I've never met in person because we just exist in this world through videos like this and whatever. But so Sri is also part of my writing group now. And so I don't know, but I'd heard you mention this book a few times. And I remember it was a couple months ago or something. And you were talking about rereading it for just like a comfort reread. And I was like, you keep talking about this book, so we need to talk about it on the podcast. So I think I know, having read it now and knowing you, why this book is something that you love so much. But can you just tell us a little bit about like, what is it that keeps bringing you back to this book?
Yeah, so there's a few different things. I think that given the two lead characters' positions and status in society, so Diana's a countess in her own right.
Yeah.
And Bay is, you know, he has this like really like shadowy, like mythical almost persona.
Well, I just told you to tell us why you like it, but maybe we should do a brief synopsis first.
Yeah, we can do that.
Like, what the heck are we talking about? So you know this book better than I do, but I'm going to try to summarize this a little bit. So Devilish, it's actually the final book in a series about the Malloran family.
So it's in the middle. Jo Beverley has Mallorans and Friends, which is her whole series. And again, I love family series. Obviously, I'm like writing one of them. But there's like, I think it's 13 books. I have a couple left to read. The first 5.
The way I saw it broken down on her website was she had this in a group of 5.
Yeah,
that was like the siblings
first. Yes. And so then she moves into like the and Friends.
Group. And then it goes on to like include other people connected to the family. Okay,
yeah.
So it's this whole kind of world she created around this family, the Mallorans. And Bay, our main character, is short for Beowulf, which I love.
I know. It's so dramatic. That's so one of the reasons I love it.
Yes. So he is a Marquess, and I'm blanking on his actual title right now because they don't
Lord
say
Hrothgar.
Hrothgar. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yes, he's the Marquess of Hrothgar. And obviously we're kind of getting the, when they introduce the family, I can tell that we've already like seen their stories and how they've fallen in love. But it does make me interested to kind of go back and see the way that he is portrayed in those books, because he's very much this like the backbone of the family. Right.
And she's written it that way. Like in her author's note, I think she says that like you see his story, or like you see him present in all of those sibling stories. And so you know, and you also see that throughout the rest of the series too, in the other books that I've read too. Like he's always kind of pulling the strings,
Yeah.
you know, behind the curtain.
Yes. He is the Marquess. He's the one who needs to be in control. Like Sri mentioned power a lot because we're going to talk about power and control. But so he's our main lead. And then our female main character, his co-lead, Diana, as Sri just mentioned, she is a countess in her own right. So she is one of those kind of rare instances where as a female, she was able to inherit because there was not a male. She was the only child. There was not a male child. And so she inherited the title when her father died. So she's a woman with a lot of power. And the reason this book works and the reason I like all the dynamics is because like the conflict is essentially that they have both said that they're never going to marry for different reasons, but that's like super legit. So for Diana, it's like if she marries, like, yeah, she still technically is the countess, but because of we know how the world worked at the time, like essentially her husband would then really be the one in control, right?
Yeah, she has a great line where she's talking to Bay's sister, and I put this in my notes of like things I liked. And, you know, Bay's sister is like, well, if you marry, like, you'll still be the countess. And she's like, but I wouldn't be the lord. And so she's very aware of the fact that, and, you know, and this is mentioned in her point of view chapters and Bay's as well, that like, you know, I think we've talked about things, the marriage act and culture, like under the law, the husband and wife are one person and that person is the husband. And so she really is cautious about even just, you know, as we'll get into like her explorations around like still having desire and interest in physical relations and things like that.
Yes. So she's determined never to marry because she wants to keep the control and take care of her people and just very legit reason, right? Oh, I should also say that this book takes place in like 1760s sometime. So, and it was written in 2000. So I think that's important because there's a few problematic things, but I also think it's very progressive for its time.
Agree too. That's something that really spoke as well. Like I said, I think when I'm talking about, there are definitely some problematic things, but a lot of the like really frank discussions are, you know, just refreshing because I'm like, oh, these are themes that like I still am thinking about, you know, for better or for worse.
But it's very, I think, progressive in the way that it engages looking at really just kind of these ideas of desire and kind of possessing your sexuality, I guess, and also consent, which we'll talk about as well. But yeah, so it's 1760s. And because Bay is kind of powerful, he really has an important role in the king's court, which is important. And this is the king and queen that we see in Bridgerton. Okay. So just, I don't know if that helps or not, but, and it's also important that this is just kind of after one of the many conflicts that England's had with France that has just been resolved, but it's prior to the French Revolution, it's prior to the American Revolution. Okay, so we're on the brink of that, but it hasn't happened yet. But say Rothbard,
I just wanted to interject too. I think like a big part of this, and we'll get to dissecting Bay's character, but you know, the fact that he's sort of the lead of his family, like with his younger siblings, and then the way that he also manages the king, because the king is younger than him, is really interesting to me. And, you know, again, like, he has a lot of power, but likes to shield a lot of that. Like, he is not someone that needs to put all this on display. Like, he's not, you know, rakish in the ways where you might see somebody that's really clamoring for attention. And that sort of like icy, needing to keep everything controlled kind of thing is what I think is really compelling about his character.
Yeah, it's interesting. But his reason for never wanting to marry, even though he is a Marquess, he needs to, you know, worry about heirs and passing on the family line and all of that. But when he was young, so all his siblings, he has 4 siblings who were married in the previous books, and we meet them all in this book. They all come from a different mother. So, and it sounds like she was a pretty wonderful woman. She's since deceased, but Bay's mother had Bay and then had another child. He had a little sister, and she went mad. She went a little nuts, and she ended up killing his little sister, and he witnessed it.
Just an interjection to say, like, I don't think this is, you know, covered in the book as much, but it's another way where I think, like, you know, it's interesting to think about how things like postpartum depression and, you know, the stress of motherhood are, I don't think Jo Beverley is on a ton with his mother, at least in that kind of language. But it does show up, in other books as well through the series. And, it's something he grapples with and other people in his family because it, really changed the course of their family. But I find that interesting too. Like, I think that she, is bringing up something that's worth discussing. And I don't know that I've seen a ton of that in historical romance, but I would love to,
Yeah. And so then I don't remember. I think she then kills herself too. I don't remember if it said, but I know she kills the baby. She kills the baby and then she dies.
Yes.
And so, and he like witnessed this. He was like 5.
I think it was also, there was it was like scarlet fever or something, right? Because his parents and then, he was supposed to like stay away. And that also like ate at his conscience too, that he couldn't like go and save people. So and his other brother was sick as well, Brand.
Yeah, this has hugely shaped him, obviously, like huge early life trauma.
Yes.
But he is just determined that he will not have a child because he doesn't want to have any chance of passing on mental illness to any child. He does not want that to continue. And so he's relying on his brother and his brother's child to then take on the title. And he's just adamant. He will never marry. He will never have children. And so they're very legit reasons that they both have for not wanting to marry. But then it gets really complicated really quick because of gender dynamics, power dynamics. She had petitioned the king to be able to take up her family's seat in Parliament in the House of Lords. And he was like, whoa, 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 you're a woman. And basically kind of saw it as you're stepping out of your place and we need to get you married. And so it gets really complicated really fast. There's also people trying to kill Bay because of his influence with the king. Has to do with, it's really complicated, but gets into the dynamics again between England and France and trying what was all going on there. But basically that's our setup. And then they end up being forced to work together. Mm-hmm. She has to go meet the king. He wants her to get married. She's trying to find ways to avoid it. Bay's trying to help her. And he essentially has said, like, if you really can't get out of this, I'll marry you because I'll kind of let you be as much as possible. But this is going to be a marriage in name only. The problem is they're wildly attracted to each other.
Yeah.
And she's very much like, I'm kind of like, all my friends are getting married and all that, like, and I'm very attracted to this man and I have these desires and I want to know what physical and romantic love is all about. And
she knows enough about him to say, like, he's a threat to her, like, in a way, like, your crush might be a threat to you, but she is really drawn to the fact that, like, he has no need to take what I have and he's going to let me have what I have. And I find that kind of like that initial just respect and being able to say, like, I see you as an equal is so, I mean, it's attractive to me. Like, I like that they see each other.
In today's present time.
I agree. I'm like, I want to be seen as competent in my own life. Like, that's amazing. And for that time, it was amazing too. So that's something that, like, really speaks to what I like to see in romance.
So anyways, that's a brief synopsis about some of the main points. I mean, we could go on and on because there's a lot in this book. I will say, I told Sri this, we've been emailing. I did really enjoy this book. I see why she loves it. I love a lot of the themes that it touches on, the power dynamics, the commentary on gender, all these pieces. But for some reason, it just I didn't love it. I did not like it. I love what it's doing. But for some reason, I just didn't finish the book and be like, I love this book. And I'm still figuring out why. I think part of it a little bit was pacing. I'm not going to lie. Yeah. It dragged in the middle for me. But and there was a whole, we can go into it because it's symbolic, but there was this whole part with an automaton, which is fine. I don't mind automatons. But they kept talking about how very realistic, like, little child, and it just creeped me the hell out. And every time they talked about it, I'm just picturing this, like, creepy doll that's like, I don't know.
No, I mean, it is like the like porcelain doll in the attic. And like, I'm not necessarily a horror person, but I like a little element of like psychological gothic flavor. And so it's like dark enough for me because if you have internal turmoil and you have internal angst, you're going to have some, like, it's a weird book. Like, you're going to have some weirdness, So when you were saying that, I was like, this is so funny to me because yes, 4 times I was like, oh, talking about the automaton. And but like I just
Talking
sort of
about,
let
yeah.
that go. I was like, well, like I said, it's like Hamlet and his skull, right? Like you get
Yeah.
you get the obsession, and you're like, well, they're gonna just have to like get back to this. But yeah, and that's fine because well, just hearing you talk about like how strange you think it is even funnier because for me, like I think I said this in my review at one point. I'm like, I feel like she wrote this book specifically for me. Like it just hits on all the things that I like, and I'm like, I don't know what that says about me, but it was doing it for me, and it still is.
And I love that it does it for you. And I wanted to love this because I know you love it. And it just, I don't know. I just, like I said, all the elements were there. It just,
Yeah,
I don't know, for some reason. And it's not, I did not dislike it at all.
yeah. No, obviously there's a lot to talk about, but I get it.
Yeah.
And there's parts where, I like one of the things we were talking about in terms of some of the old school things, like Diana's attack, like there's a lot there that I'm like, whoa, this is kind of heavy. And like, I don't know that I wouldn't necessarily handle it like this,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. There's a point where she's literally like seconds away from being raped. So it's like,
yes, it's a,
well,
it's
and I mean,
lot.
I would argue in a way she's already been assaulted, but it's,
yes. Yeah. That's why I still talk about it. I mean, it's still an attack. Like she was, kidnapped.
Yeah. So it's it gets a little it goes more into detail than I feel like a lot of books being written today would.
Yeah.
And part of me is like, I applaud the bluntness and the ability to go there, but I think maybe it's just because we're worried about like content warning kind of thing. Like this could be really triggering to some people, but like
definitely.
Yeah.
And I think like also with the heavier like core elements and like that sort of things seem like very and we can talk about this theme too, but things seem like, oh, nothing's happening. And there's a lot happening like in the background. And it's interesting because like, that's not the sort of thing. It's not like I need books to always take place at court. It's just like pulling strings, the sort of consistent flips in power that I find really interesting.
Yeah.
But I will say that like that's something she definitely focused on. Jo Beverley herself has said in one of her notes, she likes working some of those things. And I do find this discussion interesting because they all, different characters at different points, like have a hand in sort of shaping a lot of these politics and like are very close to the king. And so there's a lot of, attention on that and interest in that. And I find it interesting to see how they sort of do the self-serving while also trying to do like what's for the greater good. And I think this is something kind of about like Georgian romance in general, because like I think Elizabeth Hoyt does this well in Maiden Lane. I'm reading Anne Stewart's Ruthless right now, and there's like elements of some of this like Georgian romance is not afraid to get a little dark, a little bloody. Like, they're a little bit more of like feeding the darker impulses and the id that I find, I don't know, again, what that says about me, but I find it really interesting from a psychological perspective, certainly. And so I think that's why, again, it's compelling to me to sort of, and I mean, that's what they're struggling with, right? Like both Diana and Bay have positioned themselves as like, we are going to resist, which is kind of an inactive stance for their characters for the whole book. And yet they're presented with like this temptation all the time. Like they acknowledge directly their desire for each other, which I'm like, hot. You can talk about things really frankly. Like I'm into that.
Open communication is
exactly
good. It's good. Yeah. Well, and I think you brought this up in some of the notes you shared with me, but like I mentioned, I feel like this book is kind of ahead of its time a little bit in the way it discusses consent because she's really like, we can come together. I can have this experience and that can be it. And he's like, really? Can you just have just,
At the start of the book, his sister has been doing some work to like get these pamphlets out there. And she's like, because that's interesting too. Like, I love the whole, like having to control your reactions around like your entire family being there. And they're like, we've already locked that like the two of you, have been making eyes at each other. And so his sister has basic conversation with each of them to sort of like intervene. And like, they're both very clear on what's happening. They're like, oh, like I'm just being told off. Like, and of course that's only going to make me want this more. So she gives Diana a pamphlet and Diana has like some experience with things, through her own explorations, but then there's reading material and, she's been doing her own reading. So she's like, she's definitely naive in a lot of ways that she and Bay sort of butt heads about because there's an age difference, because she, was in his view silly to try and get her role in the House of Lords. And that's started this whole mess and brought attention to her. So now she has even less freedom than what she had. There's a great line where she's like, or he's like, I'm trying to return you what you have now. It's like, but not what I had an hour ago. He's like, what you an hour ago was like a false idea of what you have. You know, you couldn't just run free. Like you weren't going to have unchecked power, even if you're in the North. And I find the North-South thing really interesting too.
Yeah. Yeah. Because her holdings, her estate, her earldom is in the North, and there's a lot of conversation about having to go south to London and to the king.
And that it's sort of like this more like refined, like quote unquote tamed court life of London and the sort of friction.
The wilds of the North.
The wilds of the North, exactly. Right. So I find that, you know, of course it speaks a lot of their characters and Bay being very controlled and Diana having some impulses that he finds immature because of her frustrations as a woman, which like, I think she holds it together pretty well. Like I'd be mad about a lot of things that I feel like she did not just, you know, start popping off about. And I think, it has to do with, you know, her age, her gender, what power she thinks she has. And there's an interaction that, you know, prior to this book they have, because I'm just going to talk about this briefly because I think it's mentioned in different ways and I think it might be kind of important to their characters. But his brother Brand married her cousin in the prior book, and that relationship was interesting too. Rosa wants to, you know, she needs to have like an heir to her husband's title in order to kind of maintain the properties and stuff. And the new like heir that's going to be coming in, because her husband's like sick at that point, is, you know, a bad man. And so I forget how Brand ends up there. I'm pretty sure he's just like by the side of the road and they like rescue him. And then she's like, I wonder if I can like start a relationship with this man that is supposed to be like rehabilitating in my home. And obviously there's like all kinds of ethical concerns there. And so Rothbar understandably is like, this woman and her cousin, this countess, have like drugged my brother. And he's trying to like, you know, investigate. Are they going to like try to kill him? Like, what are they doing? Are they going to take advantage of him? Again, power dynamics with like, you know, assault and rape and things like that. And so anyway, he goes to like confront and like rescue Bran. By this point, he and Rosa are just like, we're good. Like, we love each other. But like no one else has gotten the memo. So then Diana like manages to like get the upper hand because she pulls a pistol on him. And like he has never had someone, you know,
challenge him that way.
Yeah, challenge him that way and just succeed in like pulling the wool over his eyes, right? And like she also was in disguise like as Rosa's maid through a lot of the book, and like he wasn't wont to that. So both of them start the book in a way coming for this family wedding already on guard, because she's like training her fencing master, or her, you know, the person that's like coaching her in shooting. And she's like, I cannot let him unnerve me like that, because she hesitated before, you know, shooting, I think was the thing. And Bay is like, no one has ever managed to like get this close to me in a lot of ways. And she's a woman and she's younger. And so he's like, what am I going to do about this? So both of them are like,
I know.
Yeah, exactly. How dare she? They're both kind of like on guard already because they feel like they've made a fool of themselves in front of each other.
And this book starts, so for me not having read the previous ones, right? So this is my first introduction to him as a character. This book opens, and it's kind of funny because it actually opens from his brother's point of view. It doesn't open from Bay's point of view. And so it took me a second. I was like, who's the main character here? Because I was like, it is not, I don't think it's the guy who's, like, it took me just a couple pages to clock that, like, he was not it.
Yeah.
But, like, anyway, it was just interesting. But it starts with, like, him in a duel.
Yes.
With a pretty skilled person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like you're already seeing this, like, challenge to him in a way.
Yeah. And he's aware of it. Like, that's the thing, too, is that he's, like, calculating the steps. I find that interaction with him and his brother Bright, especially on Mystery Read, it was something that was more fascinating to me because there was a lot of friction, because Bright was, like, I can't remember if they shared the same mother or not, but there's, like, some friction between, like, who should have had the title and who shouldn't, or something like that, or, like, they used to butt heads about, you know, who was going to have this power.
Well, they don't have the same mother as how I read it.
Yes.
But Bright is the next in line if Bay does not have a child. And so basically it's going to fall then on Bright's son, and Bright doesn't want to put that pressure on.
And that's what I thought was really interesting too, because, like, Bright is very obvious about being like, why will you not marry to to help me in this way and to help my son. And they have a really, like, again, frank conversation about Bae being like, well, one of your options is to give me the child, or like, you know, I could just go now. And like, you know, he's like, do you thirst for the marquisate? And he's like, no, I don't.
He's like, I don't want it.
He's like, I need to like, you know, you need to get a grip and like get married. That's what I want. So that's the friction that I found like super interesting, because Bae, up until this point, is someone who's, and you see this in the book too, he's a protector. He's willing to go to all lengths for his family. But this is the one line that he will not cross. And, you know, with a brother that he's like the closest to, Bright's super frustrated about that. He's like, what do you mean that like this is all of a sudden what you can't do, you know?
Yeah.
The whole
it's interesting too that
all things are possible. Like, is to removing obstacles. So like, this is a place where he's like, what's the line?
But I think that initial kind of opening with the duel at first was like, what is this? But it does a couple things, because one, it shows us that there is a real threat to Bae, because this has kind of been set up. We find out that the guy who's dueling is very skilled, and it was someone prompted him into doing this essentially because they wanted to see if they could kill Bae. And this is part of this kind of overall plot that we got of someone trying to take his life. And he's keen to it. He's like, I think there's something else going on here. Yeah. But he's pissed because it is kind of the more, he's used to being in control. He's used to not being bested except by Diana in the previous book, which they mention a lot in this one.
Yeah.
And so, you know, before when he's dueled, like it's always like he's masterfully kind of just been in control the whole time. But because this was intentionally a skilled person to try and match him to try and kill him, he had to exert like a lot more effort than he usually does. Yeah. And so he's mad that he had to show publicly this side of himself that he likes to keep hidden, right?
Yeah.
It's like he's shown both the extent of his mastery, that he is very good at this, but also that like he's more human and he couldn't just be the polished, I'm just in control and I'm going to smack this down. And I think that tells us
and then Brand's
so
like,
much about him.
Hey, that was close. And Brand says that at some point too. He's like, from what I heard, like that was close. And so it is like, that's the first sort of, you know, because the incident with Diana was in the prior book, but this is the first place where you see immediately, like, I think even if you haven't read the books right away, you know, they talk about the eminence de war and like the dark Marcus, like you can tell that this guy has this like smoke and mirror kind of persona. Nobody knows that much about him. They know he's powerful. He's sort of pulling all these strings. At some point, Diana's like, you're a secret agent? He's like, no, but I employ a lot of shadowy figures. Like he likes to keep his power in the ground in a way where like people know it, but they don't know the full extent. And he had to reveal himself. And, you know, like you said, this is the first place where we see that there's like a chink in the armor, and he is, you know, he's cracking in a way, and he's becoming human. And like, he is cracking through the whole book. And like, I do love to see a man break. I love to see a man cry in romance. Like, again, I don't know what that says about me, but I find it like so compelling to take like any kind of like really uptight, like restrained, controlled, starchy character and just see them struggle with things unraveling, you know?
Yeah, but it's really interesting because he always wants to be in the protector position. Like that is his thing, because he couldn't protect his sister, right? And so it's like this very, but there's several times in the book where Diana protects him and he almost can't handle it. Like it's like,
no, he definitely cannot handle it. Yeah. He again, like they speak really directly about it, where he's like, I think you've forgotten like who's in the role of who's protecting who. And at one point she's like, I have the instinct to protect. And he's like, well, then we're likely to trip over each other because I mean, he's getting like
we're going to butt heads because we both.
He's irritated. He's like, no, like you have to let me help you in these ways. Like, you know, when they're training her for court, and he's like, yeah, it's okay. Like, don't show me that you can rise from your curtsy. Like, you have to let me do that. You know, like it's not a place to act unwise. And he's very like, you know, he will plan out all the chess moves before making a move, and Diana's more impulsive in certain ways. And so that's part of the friction too, where he's like, you have to be careful because we cannot be forced into this like marriage in name only. It's going to be a disaster like for both of us because
and that
we
planning
are really
though, sorry, my brain's linking back now to where I was trying to go a long time ago, then we diverted, but that is fine.
That's okay. That happens to me all the time.
No, it's okay. That's fine. But I was talking about consent, because in the scene where they do come together, this is actually after Diana has saved him, because they've been ambushed on the road south to go to London to meet the king. And she ends up having the hero shot that ends up killing the last bad guy so that they themselves cannot be killed. And it's the first time like she's killed someone, and she's kind of shaken by it. So they have this moment of like passion of the after violence. It's like you're heightened and you need, you know. Anyways, and he understands what's going on. She understands what's going on, but they're like,
he just does it. He's like, he like can tell. And I have to just like plug this line because it's still, like I said, lives like rent free in my head. And so he's, you know, he's like, the seats in my coach like fold down into a bed. And she's like, what? And he's like, well, just so you can like rest and like recuperate. And then she's like looking at him, you know, it's like, oh, I want to jump phones right now. And he's like, yes, it happens. He's like, I know it happens sometimes after violence. And I was like, I cannot believe that he actually just like said it like that. Yeah. And he's like rubbing his thumb over her lip or something. I'm like, sir, this is too much for me. And I'm just reading the book. Like I'm about to come up.
So it's later that night. They're at the inn and they're giving in after a lot of conversation and whatever of like, this is our one time. But they're kind of, and it's kind of, at first, they're going to like do everything without like fully doing the deed, right? Because it's kind of like, well, let's experience passion, but we can't cross that line because it'd be too much. And I can't remember exactly what he says, but there's some moment where they're getting hot and heavy. And he's like, you need to decide right now. He's like, because you cannot. He's like, you have to decide before we go into this if we're going to cross that line officially or not, because you can't decide in the moment because you won't be able to. Like, I can't remember how he phrases it, but it's basically like,
I remember. And it's so like, that's a thing that you sort of see, like, again, with that, like, violence scene and other scenes too. Like, he is maybe not comfortable, but he's sort of like, the interesting part about that is like, she's in what would be like the typically masculine role, right? Like, she has to like work off her energy after this like violent thing. And he's like fine acknowledging that. Yeah. Because he also knows what that feels like. They talk about like, you know, this sort of like need for him to sort of like resolve conflict by like has to kill the bad guy, and she like thwarts one of those chances or something. So it's very much like, you know, that alpha sort of energy. But at the end, you know, again, they're acknowledging like you're just like speaking in under the effect of danger is what he tells her. It's what he tells Diana when she comes to him. And then she's like, oh, and are you not? And he's like, well, why do you think that I'm letting you sit here, you know? So
why do you think I let you into my room? Why do you
exactly? Which is a very clever way of like, he never will directly just be like, yeah, me too. He's going to sort of like say, you can take the implied meaning, because again, he has to keep those things close to his chest. Yes, but when they are negotiating like the consent part, he, you know, he's like, you have to decide now if we take a safe path or not. And it's like, oh, you won't be able to stop otherwise? And he's like, no, I will stop. I love that, you know, this isn't a thing that's going to like, I'm not going to be so swept away that I'm not going to be thinking about this, which is also something that she wants him to be swept away and be more human. But he's like, no. And he's like, it's just not something you can decide in the heat of the moment. And I thought that
like,
was
you're not going to be logical because you're going to be swept up in these feelings.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I loved it. It was great.
Me too.
And there's something, I mean, we've mentioned her saving him, but another piece that is commented on a lot, and he's trying to like teach her how to mask this in terms of being able to please the king and stuff, is that she's very competent. And I think because of her role, she has trained, like you've alluded to, in all these kind of what are normally the manly pursuits. So like she is a crack shot. She knows how to fence. She's very assertive with her opinions. And this is all the stuff that he's saying, like, you cannot show this. You need to be the demure female who is, you know, saying, oh, yes, I do need the guidance of a husband and stuff. But it shows how much he understands the game that needs to be played, for lack of a better word, in terms of those court politics. Yeah. And in some ways,
he understands like that it's hard for her. Like at one point she says, I resent on your belonging, on your protection. It's a personal experience for like my siblings. And I was like, no, just very direct and about like, I can do this because I'm a man. You can't show that you understand Greek and Latin, and like, you can't rise from your own curtsy. And like, he understands the frustration, but he's also like, this is, if you want what you want, which is not going to be what you originally wanted, because that's never going to come to you. But if you want to maintain what you have and you don't want to get married to me, this is what I can do for you. And you're going to have to kind of get on board with the fact that like, let's be practical about this. you're going to have to do this in order to get what you want. Like, can you keep that in mind? Or are you going to react really like instinctively about certain things? So like those discussions are interesting because they just see a lot about each other. Like they do see a lot about each other's behavior. And I find that interesting because they don't keep it to themselves. Like they will just call each other out on that stuff, you know?
Well, it was interesting as I was reading it because I kept going back and forth between being, part of me was like impressed that he understands all this and like he knows how to play the game and get her what she wants and he's willing to do that for her and help her. And but then the other part of me was like, God, stop telling her to suppress who she is. Let her shine. Let her be these, you know. And it was kind of like I kept going back and forth where I was like pissed and I was happy. But the thing is, like, I think the reason it frustrated me so much is that is life. We're constantly within our like I was thinking, I think about it in the context of, not to go off on a tangent here, we're talking about a book, but Sri and I both self-publish our books. And there is a lot of decisions that you have to make that you've maybe never even thought of before when you are trying to publish and sell and market your books. Because we live in late stage capitalism and it is a hellscape. And I am constantly battling with myself. And now AI has entered the picture. So, but it's like, I hate that I am beholden to Amazon. To sell my books but it's like, how much are you willing to play the game to get what you want and need? Because there's some part of you that has to compromise a little bit, because if you are going to, just to use the analogy of this book, and sorry, I'm going off now, but like, if I'm going to be Diana and I'm going to embrace all these things about me and say, no, I'm going my own way, you may end up losing the thing you really want. And like, so for me, it's like, where and how am I willing to compromise what I'm doing in order to put my books out in the world? Otherwise, they may never be discovered. They may never be read. I may never make enough to be able to have the money to invest in and publish another book. Anyway, I think I was so frustrated because I see these same conflicts in many aspects of life.
Yeah. And far be it from me to defend a man, but I'm gonna jump in on Bay's behalf here, because he does say in the coach, you know, when they get sort of fatigued, where she's like, I think you must really want to marry me because, you know, we're giving up. And she does sort of joke at one point. She's like, oh, maybe I should just do that to like make all these women tear their hair out. And he's like, don't. Like, I'm going to be really bad to you. But he says, he's like, you're just an extraordinary woman in some sort of way. And she's like, you know, is that a compliment? And he's like, don't beg for compliment. And she's like, can't you say that extraordinary in like a positive light or an attractive light? And he's like, yeah, that's exactly what I mean. And so that's when they like kind of talk about like that elephant that's sort of in the room. But, you know, he'll give her that. He'll call her Iron Hand, right? Like he knows, he's like, you're still that like warrior maiden of the North. And like, he talks about that, you know, he's like, you have to sort of surrender and like, trust me if we're going to, you know,
well, and
do
that's
this
what makes it
end.
okay. And that's what redeems it, is that
like he sees her,
he's telling her, you need to
strategy.
suppress these things, not because I don't want you to be them. He's saying you need to do it in order to be able to like have the best outcome of this crappy situation. But I see
and
you.
other people
I
aren't going to see
this.
it. They're not going to appreciate it.
So it's like, but he's like, I respect it. I want you to still be that person. He's not trying to like ultimately change her. And that's why I'm like,
and they talk about that too. Like at the end, you know, where they're kind of getting their resolution. She's like, you adore me exactly as I am. Or you like me exactly as I am. And he's like, yeah, I adore you exactly as you are. And so I think that there's something, I don't know, to me, it's like you're kind of facing it together. Yes, she has more of a risk, but you know, even when they're talking about, she's like, oh, like I'll still see you at court. And he's like, did you think that I was going to abandon you? Like that hurts him a lot, you know? And even at one point he's like, I have to get back, but I just want to breathe the same air that she's breathing. Like this man is gone, you know? And there's distance that he's keeping because he trusts that she can do what she needs to do. Like when they're talking about some of the shadowy things that he's doing, he's like, I would not be telling you these things if I didn't think you could keep a secret. So there's just that, again, that mutual trust, that respect. He's, you know, teaching her how to do this strategically, but he's not doing it for her, right? Like, yes, he has to lift her from the curtsy, but he's like, I trust you to be able to manage this. Like they come up with a code at like her creation of this code for how they're going to talk about the king and queen. She's like, I could spy. It would just be gossip. And so, there's stuff like that where he is giving her freedom and he is letting her sort of do these things that are more like mentally interesting and like, more that like engaging art of queens and other just like because people have to survey like, how much of a lady are you? Like, are you quote unquote normal? So there is this part of like being on display, but he does remind her, and he's like, I see you and I know who you are. It's just one of those things where like, I don't know, it reminds me of something like the Hunger Games, where it's like, you have to hold on to like the core of who you are, right? So he will strategically tell her, or, when she needs it, he's like, yeah, I'm going to share this secret with you. And like, we'll talk about the work that I'm doing. And like, don't be conventional and disappoint you, Diana. Cause like, he knows that she has views that aren't conventional. And, the whole Iron Hand thing, like he will give her those things when he sees that she needs it. And she doesn't always have to ask for it either. Like he'll know. So again, I don't know. Like I said, I do not defend men like this, but there's just something about Bay that I just understand where he's coming from in a way where I'm like, I get that you want to give her like everything and you can't. And you're so used to like holding things back, even from like your family. Like you have to be cruel and practical with Bright, like your brother that you're super close to and his son who you love, and say like, no, I'm not willing to do this for you. And and she recognizes that too. Diana's like, at one point, Rose is like, yeah, I guess like Hrothgar's hot if you admire a finely made blade. And she's like, he's not just a weapon. I can't see how alone and lonely life is. Like you do see that through all the things, because if you're making difficult decisions, you are seen as like cold, and that's the persona that he has. And she's like, no, that's not the Bay that I see. Right. So I don't know. I find that like, yeah, it's just very touching for me.
Well, and it's interesting too, because at one point she kind of keys into the fact that the king is actually basically like, she was distracted at one point and agreed to let the king and queen choose who she would marry, like kind of deferring to they know
because
best.
She was thinking about Bay.
She was thinking about him. Yeah. And, and then she's like, wait, what did I just agree to?
Yeah. So the king's like, oh, and you want to get married, don't you? Like, and she's like, yes.
Yeah. And so she's like playing off this whole like, well, I'd really like to marry someone I love. So like, can you give me a little chance to investigate these candidates and like see? So she's trying to like buy time. But she clues in at some point to the fact that the person the king actually wants to match her with is Bay.
Yes.
And so in some ways it's like a solution to the problems, because he's gonna say, like the king is gonna say this needs to happen, and they can't really argue with it. And then they both can like give into what they really want. But she's like, but this isn't the way I want it. Like he cannot be forced.
Love that.
And so she's like, it'll never work if he is forced into this marriage. I need to find a way to break through to him to say, it is okay. You can give in. Like you can have a child. You can take this risk.
Love, right? Like I think it's And she says that at one point too. She's like, it's
like making him love her. Well, he already loves her, but
right. It's letting himself sort of and that's I do have more to say about that too, because I do think there's some interesting things there. But I see like that to me is also interesting too, because I think for characters we see like, the choice points are like, in order to kind of keep the story going, they get what they want, but maybe it's not in the way they want it, or they don't what they want. Those are the things you have to navigate. And so that's a place where she's like, no, that would be worse than not marrying at all, because we're just going to stick more tightly, or at least he's going to stick more tightly to the fact that like, I can't let myself, be fully in this with you, and that they were forced to do it. It's like, she doesn't want his surrender in that way. Like she wants him to want to give this. And it's the same thing for her. And so that adds like another layer to what's going on there, because like, of course, there's these like longing looks and like her little like fan signal to say that I love you. I was like, oh my God, that's so cute. But they cannot let the king actually be encouraged by that, because that causes a problem. So like they have to like more distant, they're still sort of like constant clarity there. And I think, that's just kind of like, that's heartbreaking. Like it's angsty in a way where it's like, you have something within reach. You have something that could be the perfect solution. But again, they talk about him being, Daedalus in the maze. And I think it is one of those things where that's what I find fascinating with my characters were like, and people talk about this with romance all the time. It's like, well, why can't you just have a conversation? Sorry, at that point, like that feels like the most frightening thing to do. So he's built up so many walls. He doesn't see that like this is self-created. He doesn't see that there's a way out. I think that is what happens to people. Like you cling so tight to what you know, and if you know is this false cage that you've built up, then that is going to be what you cling to. So I find that, really interesting. There was something that you just mentioned about.
I was talking about how she's like, I need you to want this. Like it can't be forced. It can't be.
Oh, right. And the sort of like her, the shift in like she sees it being more possible. Like, okay, my new mission is to like make him see that he deserves these things. I mean, at one point she says like, no, I just told her like, I mean, it's wrong for us to go through life alone. And like, that's kind of breaks it. Or like, it's right to go through life alone. And I just find that like so moving too, because eventually like he does realize through his siblings, through himself that like he knows he's causing her pain. And like that is unbearable compared to causing himself pain. But I think it's interesting too, because sometimes with heroines, like this isn't an arc I always like where they have to be the steadier one. They have to be the one that's like, convincing the other person to love and love them. And what was interesting about
totally
what I wrote. No, me too. That's what I'm saying. With the Bali book, like that is exactly what ends up happening. Like Rachita is a steadier person because she has accepted being human. Like she even talks about like, oh, the way that I tried to solve this problem might not have been the right thing. And he doesn't even let her take that fault. And she's like, it's okay though. Like I can admit when I've made a mistake and I've done something wrong. You can't do that. Like you don't think that you're even allowed mistakes or, you have the falsehood that you're above them. Like that is what makes you fragile. Like that rigidity is what's easy to break. And I think that's interesting, especially when you map it onto like these gender roles where I think we do see in historical romance, like the heroines have to be the ones that open the alpha male up to love and like they're the softer ones. And so this is maybe a variation of that. Yeah. But like, in a way where I don't feel like the point is losing power. In fact,
because how many times have we seen the story where it's like, I refuse to have an heir because it's like, I can't carry on the family line, but this is such a different way in which it's set up for the reason why. It's not that like I'm spiting my father who was terrible, which is kind of what I wrote. I mean, the first book in my current series, Bequeathed, like my hero West has just inherited his own marquisate. We're talking about a marquess here. And he basically like the woman, that he falls for, he just is like, no, my father would have loved her and I cannot do anything that would please him.
But that's human too.
Yeah. And so, but it's like, it's this, but this is, it's not like I refuse to have an heir, but it's more like I can't do anything that would make my father happy, know, and, or would have. I mean, his father's now dead. Yeah. And so it's just the stubbornness that she has to break through. And so there's some real parallels here. But, Jo Beverley does it much more masterly than I do in terms of having kind of like a real legit reason where he is just like scared to of like what could happen. Like there's a legitimacy there.
And there's a power too in that, like, the book starts with him talking to Bright about like the Countess has like a big house that her like there are certain things that like, Diana has more power in. And he's talking to Brand at one point and his other brother about like, well, what if things did pass through like the mother and they took the mother's last name and like titles passed down that way, which is like, you think he's in this role of like trying to limit Diana, but his views themselves are not like that. And he talks about like, being instrumental in the marriage acts and stuff. And so, I think like, yes, he's the one that sort of has to put these boundaries down because Diana's more willing to move past them. And then ultimately that's kind of what is the shift in opening up to love because she's willing to kind of break those barriers. So you sort of see the strengths of both of their ways of thinking about things, like his ability to kind of like put emotion aside and do the thing that needs to be done to achieve the end that is ultimately going to make her happy is important in the beginning. And then her ability to say like, life is risk, right? They talk about that, which is still something I'm learning. So, this is still important. So, her ability to see that and say like, again, just say things like, tell me it's right for us to go through life alone. Like, I don't think that that's what we're meant to do or what anyone's meant to do. Like, this is a right for every human being. And even though she's younger, even though she's naive and less experienced in the ways of the world, where he's like, what you want is childish, you're never going to be in the House of Lords. Here's a place where he's right. And her ability to those rules, those boundaries is what is helpful and important and appreciated, and just part of like their love story. So you get to see each of them have a role, not to mention along the way where there's all these different flips, but like they're truly two people who are coming together to make a relationship where they still get to be their own people.
Yeah.
And the things that make them who they are really appreciated about each other. And like neither one of them has to. And she says that too. She's like, do you feel changed? And he's like, yeah, I'm transformed. She's like, I don't want you to be changed. It's not supposed to happen like that. Like, this isn't meaningful.
I still want you to be you. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, well, she's like, other than like changing in the ways that like all people change when they're in love. And that's what he says. He's like, you're still going to have to put up with the fact that like, I need to be all powerful. I need to be all knowing. Like, you can't give me orders. I love that part too, where like when after the end, they're sort of talking about the fact that he's like, because of course they did not take the safe path. And he's like, if there's consequences, like you have to tell me. And she immediately, like, that's a place where she can be practical. And she's like, no, it would cause him too much pain. We can't acknowledge this child. It's going to be mine to handle alone. And you'll have to accept that. And he's like, don't give me orders. And she's like, well, don't try to fight me on this. And I find that wonderful because I love like banter and bickering as much as the next person, enemies first, but here's a place where like they're trying to do things out of care for the other person, not just their own interest. And that's creating friction because again, they both have the impulse to protect, the impulse to sort of stand in the way of like,
and so
they're too similar. They're like, let me jump in front of that bullet first. And like, then they're both cracking their heads together because they're trying to get there first,
Right.
So I just find that like, because it's like the one place where they're incompetent because it's like motivated by competence in other ways. Like they're trying to like act with their hearts,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we could talk forever, but we've already have been talking forever. So to sum up, this book has so much great commentary that I feel is in a way ahead of its time. Maybe I'm not giving 2000 enough credit, but but just, in terms of commentary on gender and different roles and power. And it's just, there's so much great things to say here. So I see why you love this book. I did thoroughly enjoy it. I so appreciate what it was doing. And I am interested to read more because like now I'm like got this taste of this family and just no creepy child automatons and we're good.
Don't worry. That's only a Bay thing.
I know. But yeah, I just need to get over it. It's seriously, every time I pictured it in my head, I just pictured like almost like a Chucky doll and it just like creeped me the hell out. But
that's fair. I don't think like related to that, like, we talked about its image of like Diana, like the son that like her dad didn't have, her future child, him as a child that needs to heal. I also find it just so endearing that like his name is Beowulf and he asks her to call him Bay. Like everybody close to him calls him Bay. I'm like, wow, that's so cute. Like that is just a little boy who is scared, like inside, like
I love
he's not the dark Marcus, like
I love it.
He's just scared.
Yeah. Well, anyways, Devilish by Jo Beverley. There's a lot to dissect. And so if you guys read it, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If not, maybe you will go check it out. Like I said, it was totally new to me. Jo Beverley has passed, unfortunately. She passed about 10 years ago, but she has quite a rich body of work.
That's another thing that, we didn't touch on directly, but in terms of like why a lot of us write, like, it's not really about like leaving a legacy. For me, it's like leaving a fingerprint in the fabric of time to be like, hey, for a while I was here and look at how great that was. And like, especially because I think about grief a lot in my own experience in the way that I write. I just think that's amazing that like, even after she's passed, it's like, I think that was 2016. So I picked up these books just within the past year. So, and Catherine says this a lot, like the publication day is like the first day in a very long life of a book. And you never know when it's going to find someone that needs it.
You don't know when it's going to hit. Yeah.
So that was just something kind of like magical about that too.
Yeah. Yeah. We can only hope. Well, Sri, thank you so much for joining me and for making me read this. Not making me, but you know what I mean. Giving me a reason to read this book. And
thank you for traumatizing me with the Anthology.
Thank you for traumatizing me. No, it's okay. And lace cuffs. We didn't go into that, but I
we didn't.
I hate the fashion of this time and the
we
wigs.
That's that's funny to me too. I think it's just, the beauty is armor thing that I talk about and all her rings and stuff. And she gives him a ring. I think it's part of the Georgian drama.
It's very set in the Georgian and it's great. But so anyways, thank you again for joining me. Everyone, read The Deed with the Duke. Again, I'll have links to info on the anthology that's coming out. I'm very excited for all the stories in that. And I'm really terrible about plugging my own stuff. So I never go into this, but you guys, please, if you enjoy this podcast, like it, subscribe, all the things, either on YouTube, on whatever platform in which you listen to that, because it does help in terms of reach and all that. So I appreciate that. I do have a Patreon for this. I haven't done a ton with it, and I don't mention it a lot, but one of the perks when you join, it just helps support me in doing this, paying for software and all that. But the other thing is, whenever I release something, you get it, an e-copy as part of subscribing to Patreon. That's the perk. And I also have an upcoming novella. It's coming out October 2nd. It's part of a multi-author series, which you're going to hear about in a couple weeks because we're going to do a bonus episode talking about that series. But yeah, so if you decide, that you want that, you could subscribe to the Patreon, and that could be one way that you could get access to that. And I'm not ready to share details yet, but I do have other stuff coming before the end of the year.
Ooh, exciting.
There'll be details soon, but there's more coming. So it's worth it to look into that, to subscribing to the Patreon, and all the link to that and everything is always in the description under this episode. So I'm really bad at plugging myself, so I just thought I'd do it today. Please like and subscribe and support this podcast. And I do have upcoming projects if you want to do that. Well, enough, because it's going to be a long episode. Sri, thank you so much again. Devilish by Jo Beverley. Let's go read some more by her. And I just love all the deep psychology and all this in this book, which I know you do too. So
yes, I do. Thank you for having me and letting me, talk about a story that just really impacted me.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's great. Well, happy reading and listening, everybody. And we'll see you next time. Bye.